Well, belated congratulations, Commissioner, first of all on the new job. What does it mean to you to be in charge now of the London Fire Brigade?
Just a feeling of an immense pride. I've been a London firefighter for nearly 20 years. I love the job, and in particular, I love this city, the opportunity it's given me, and to be able to wear this uniform and serve and protect the London public is just, it's just a massive privilege, and to lead these fantastic men and women of the brigade, I couldn't be prouder.
But what a time to take over, the start of a pandemic. We have obviously seen the ambulance service right at the forefront, the front line, the police trying desperately to work out how to monitor the lockdown. How has it impacted the fire service?
I think what it's demonstrated is, as ever, that we're a service that always steps forward at a time when London needs us. I've got 300 firefighters co-crewing ambulances with colleagues from the London Ambulance Service. I've had over 100 firefighters providing services for those people who lost their lives in their homes, so making sure they're treated with dignity and prepared for burial or funeral services. I've had my logistics people distributing their 10th million piece of PPE on Friday. So what I think the pandemic has done is allow us to step into spaces that we perhaps wouldn't normally occupy, as well as delivering our normal service to London and Londoners.
You also took over quite soon after a very critical Grenfell inquiry report, phase 1 of the inquiry. What does that mean for the work that you have to do for the fire service?
What it means is that we have to bring forward the change required to meet the recommendations laid down in that report, which we accept in full. In some of our systems, in some of the training we give them, in some of the leadership we provided them, we let them down, and in letting them down, we let some of our communities down that night. And I'm very clear about that, and therefore I'm very focused on bringing forward the change that's needed to ensure that a tragedy like that never happens in London again.
You were there that night. Is it one of those events you never really get over? Momentous, traumatic, tragic for so many people?
For me, as tragic as it was, it's been very motivating. I've family members who live on estates just like where the tower at Grenfell was. What it gave me was a great sense of motivation to ensure that it never happened again, and to ensure that the men and women of the London Fire Brigade were never put in that position again, where they had to respond to such a terrible tragedy.
What was your personal experience?
Personal experience of it was that it was the most serious incident I'd ever attended as a professional firefighter or officer, and I knew immediately on arrival that my colleagues who were there and who were risking their lives time after time, were facing the biggest professional firefighting challenge of their lives. And to be frank, what I saw in front of me was a community torn apart, a failure of the building regulation system, and just actually almost breathtaking the scale of failure of the building, and how we had so badly let so many people as a society down in that community, people who should have gone to bed feeling confident that they were safe where they lived in modern London, and yet had woken up to a scene of utter carnage.
If you had got there earlier, do you think you would have suggested that stay put was revoked earlier?
I can only tell you what my decision was in the moment, and to me, in that moment, it was very clear what the appropriate decision was. It was no longer acceptable to advise people that they were safe to stay put, and therefore it had to be changed immediately. So I think I can only answer for my decision, and I know that my decision at that point in the night was very, very clear to me.
Do you think about those people who were left behind? Does it weigh heavily on you what happened to them?
Yeah, I think that scale of loss of life in modern London, and bearing in mind that many of those people were vulnerable themselves. Well, actually, many of the residents of that tower block were vulnerable people. Many of them were people who had come to this country to seek refuge from war and other tragedy. I think they were badly let down by all sorts of organisations and legislation and years of erosion of good standards, and that actually we all have a great responsibility to ensure across government and all the relevant agencies that nothing like this could ever happen again. So yes, and obviously one of the first things I did as Commissioner was to arrange to meet the families of the victims, those most greatly affected by it. And I cannot tell you how both moving and humbling that was in terms of their courage and their great desire to seek the truth and see change so that other people wouldn't have to suffer as they did. So I think as a professional firefighter, it would be odd if it didn't weigh heavily on me.
Do you recognise, though, that you have to rebuild trust with the people of London? You've asked specifically the 7,000 residents of high-rise blocks to trust firefighters, that sometimes stay put is still the right advice for them. That's tough, isn't it?
Stay put is still the right advice in over 90% of occasions. So, you know, we're fairly clear about that. I completely accept, though, that if you live in a high-rise block in London, it's very hard to trust that advice, knowing what happened at Grenfell.
We've seen in America what's happened with George Floyd. What happens if an emergency services loses the trust of the people? It can be dangerous and very difficult. Is that why it's so important, do you think, to have a fire service, a fire brigade that is diverse, that does properly reflect the needs of its people?
London is an incredible city. I've grown up here. I've lived here all my life. My own family is mixed, is very diverse. And I think that experience of growing up in London, being a Londoner, has to be reflected in my own service, because that's how you best understand communities, their needs. And most importantly, you draw from the greatest pool of talent. The difference brings such advantage to organisations, doesn't it, in terms of thought and ability to recognise risk and respond to it. So it sits at the very heart of what we do in London, and we're working very hard to ensure that the London Fire Brigade properly represents the communities we serve in this incredible city.
People have to still live in high buildings, don't they? Why should they feel more safe today than they did 2 years ago?
Because the transformation plan we're bringing through is very detailed, even in the middle of this pandemic. It involves changes to equipment, so an increased fleet of extended turntable ladders, which means we can reach further up a high-rise building, and the introduction of smokers, which means that we can bring members of the public safely down through smoke-filled lobbies, and actually since their introduction have saved the lives of 30 Londoners across, I think, approximately 20 incidents, and have already proven their worth. So real changes that are tangible, are visible, and that the public will be able to understand as keeping them safer.
And will it live with you as a matter of regret that you didn't get this done before, that these issues weren't in place earlier, do you think?
I think it's quite hard to know what we didn't know at that point. All I do know is that we have learnt the lessons post-Grenfell, and therefore we will make all the changes we do need to ensure that we have the right equipment, the right training and the right people in place to ensure our response is fit for purpose in what is now a different understanding of the risk to
Commissioner,
people in
thank
London.
you.
Thank you very much.